A millionaire returned home feeling that something was terribly wrong. In the dead of night, he discovered his mother locked inside a wardrobe, hidden by his own daughter-in-law. What came next exposed a cruel truth that no one could deny any longer. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. The sky over Stonebridge was heavier than usual that June morning. The low clouds seemed to touch the roofs of the old houses, and the cold wind carried with it the smell of imminent rain. Richard Anderson drove his truck through the winding streets of the mountain town, a restlessness in his chest that he couldn't explain. He had left New York City 3 days ahead of schedule, leaving important meetings half-finished, ignoring calls from partners, and cancelling appointments that, under other circumstances, would have been non-negotiable. Something inside him insisted that he needed to go home, to the mansion where he had grown up, where his mother still lived, where the sweetest and most painful memories of his life were stored in every room, in every hallway. Richard was not a man of intuition. He was practical, rational, accustomed to making decisions based on numbers and concrete facts. However, for the past few days, a nagging feeling had been following him like a shadow. He would wake up in the middle of the night with his heart racing, thinking of his mother. He tried to call, but the conversations were always brief, intercepted by Christina, his wife, who would take the phone with that sweet, controlled voice, assuring him that everything was fine, that Mrs. Beatrice was just tired, that he didn't need to worry. But Richard did worry, and the more Christina tried to calm him, the more his anguish grew. The Anderson mansion was an imposing structure from the early 20th century, built by his great-grandfather on a prime piece of land from which one could see part of the town and the mountains covered in dense Appalachian forest. 3 floors of grey stone and fine wood, high windows with coloured stained glass, and an extensive garden that had once been lush and now resisted the neglect of recent years with dignity. Richard parked at the entrance and turned off the engine. The silence that filled the space was almost oppressive. There was no birdsong that used to wake him on his childhood mornings. There was no distant sound of Mrs. Davis, the housekeeper, talking with his mother in the kitchen. There was no life. He got out of the car and walked to the front door. The key turned in the lock with a familiar creak, and the door opened to reveal the entrance hall. Everything was impeccable. The marble floor shone. The antique mirrors reflected the dim light coming through the windows. The porcelain vases were perfectly positioned. But something was wrong. It took Richard a few seconds to identify what it was. Then he realized the house was different, subtly different. The painting above the sideboard had been replaced. Before, an oil portrait of his grandparents, painted in the 50s, hung there. Now, there was a modern abstract canvas, all in shades of grey and black. The Persian rug that covered the center of the hall was gone, replaced by a contemporary geometric model. The old photographs that adorned the corner table were no longer there. Richard felt a tightness in his chest. It wasn't the first time Christina had reorganized the house. Since they had married 3 years ago, she had been promoting what she called a necessary renewal. She said the mansion was beautiful, but needed modern touches, an update, new life. At first, he had even agreed. After all, the house was stuck in time, full of old furniture and objects that collected dust. But now, looking around, Richard realized it wasn't just about renewal. It was erasure. Each change eliminated a piece of the family's history, and he, immersed in work, absent for months on end, had allowed it to happen. A voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Mr. Richard, you're back." He turned and saw Mrs. Davis standing at the beginning of the hallway that led to the kitchen. The housekeeper was thinner, more stooped. Her face, always serene, now wore an expression of relief mixed with apprehension. She wiped her hands on her apron and approached slowly, as if afraid to speak too loudly. "Mrs. Davis, how is my mother?" The question came out directly, without beating around the bush. Richard had known this woman since he was a child. She had worked at the mansion for over 40 years, had been like a second mother to him, and knew every secret, every story, every pain of that family. If something was wrong, she would know. Mrs. Davis hesitated. Her eyes darted to the floor, then to the staircase leading to the second floor, and finally back to Richard. There was fear there, a fear he was not used to seeing in that strong, determined woman. "She's in her room, Mr. Richard. She hasn't been coming down much. She hardly ever leaves it." "What do you mean, she hasn't been coming down? Is she sick?" "It's not exactly that. It's just that she's been spending more time alone. She says she's very tired." Richard frowned, his concern growing. "But why? What happened?" Mrs. Davis opened her mouth to answer, but another voice interrupted her, a soft, melodious voice that echoed off the walls. "Richard, my love, you're here earlier than we expected." Christina Anderson was descending the staircase with her usual elegance. She wore a beige tailored suit, her blonde hair in a flawless bun, her subtle makeup enhancing her light-colored eyes. She was beautiful. There was no denying it. She had the kind of beauty that turned heads anywhere, a presence that dominated rooms effortlessly. When they met, Richard had been lost. He was, still carrying the immense pain of losing Marina, his first wife, and the child he never got to know. Christina had appeared like a relief, a promise of a new beginning, someone who seemed to understand his need to move on. But now, watching her descend the stairs with that controlled smile, Richard felt something different, a suspicion he couldn't name. "Yes, I'm here. I felt I needed to be." Christina reached him and kissed him lightly on the cheek. "Everything's fine here, darling. You worry too much. Your mother is just a little tired, but she's being well taken care of." "I want to see her." "Of course, but maybe it's better if you take a shower, rest a bit. The drive must have been long." "I want to see her now, Christina." There was a pause. For a moment, something flashed in Christina's eyes, a flicker of irritation, quickly disguised by an understanding smile. "As you wish, love, I'll go with you." "You don't have to. I know where my mother's room is." Richard headed for the stairs, but Christina gently held his arm. "Richard, before you go up, I need to tell you a few things. Your mother isn't doing well emotionally. She's been having moments of confusion, of deep sadness. Mrs. Davis and I have been doing our best to take care of her, but you know how it is. Sometimes age and loneliness take their toll. So, when you go up, take it easy. Don't pressure her." Richard looked at Mrs. Davis, who kept her eyes fixed on the floor. There was something wrong with that silence, but he nodded and went up the stairs. The second floor of the mansion was even quieter than the ground floor. The long, poorly lit hallways seemed to stretch on forever. Richard passed the door of the room that had been his in childhood, then his father's old office, now transformed into a space Christina used for her personal projects. At the end of the hall was Mrs. Beatrice's suite. The door was closed. He knocked lightly. "Mom, it's Richard. Can I come in?" Silence. He knocked again, this time more forcefully. "Mom?" A faint voice, almost inaudible, answered from the other side. "Come in, son." Richard turned the knob and opened the door. The room was in semi-darkness, the heavy curtains blocking almost all natural light. It took a few seconds for his eyes to adjust to the gloom. When he could finally see, what he saw took his breath away. Beatrice Anderson was sitting in an armchair by the window, huddled, wearing a faded robe that seemed too large for her body. She had always been a woman of striking presence, tall with an erect posture, possessing a gaze that commanded both respect and tenderness. But the woman Richard saw now was a shadow. Her white hair was disheveled, her face thinner, her eyes sunken and dull. She looked at her son and for a moment seemed not to recognize him. Then something lit up in her gaze and she tried to smile. "Richard, my son, you're back." He knelt beside her and held her hands. They were cold, trembling. "Mom, what's going on? Why don't you come downstairs anymore? Why are you locked in this room?" Beatrice averted her gaze to the covered window. "I'm tired, my son. Very tired." "Tired of what?" She didn't answer. She just squeezed her son's hand with surprising strength, as if she wanted to tell him something that words could not express. Richard felt a lump in his throat. Something was deeply wrong. "Mom, you're not well. I'm going to call a doctor." "I don't need a doctor, Richard. I just need peace." "What kind of peace is this? You've always been a strong, active woman. You took care of the garden, received your friends, went for your walks. What changed?" Beatrice finally looked at him, and in that gaze Richard saw something that frightened him: resignation. It was as if she had given up, as if she were just waiting for time to pass. "Things change, son. People change. The house has changed. What do you mean by that?" Before she could answer, the door opened and Christina entered, carrying a tray with tea and cookies. "I brought a snack for you both. I thought Mrs. Beatrice might like something to eat." She placed the tray on the coffee table and approached, stroking Beatrice's shoulders with a studied gentleness. "How are you feeling, mother-in-law? Better now that your son is here?" Beatrice didn't respond. She just closed her eyes, as if Christina's mere presence exhausted her. Richard noticed the tension in his mother's body, the way she shrank even further into the armchair. He stood up and looked at Christina. "I need to talk to you now." Christina smiled, unperturbed. "Of course, darling, let's go to our room." Richard cast one last look at his mother, who remained with her eyes closed, and followed Christina out of the room. As soon as the door closed, he faced her. "What is happening to my mother?" Christina sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. "Richard, your mother is getting older. It's natural for her to become more fragile, more introspective. I've been doing everything in my power to care for her, but you're not here most of the time. You travel, you work, you're away for months. I'm the one who takes care of this house, who organizes everything, who ensures she has comfort. She doesn't look comfortable. She looks imprisoned." "Imprisoned? Richard, that's absurd. Your mother has complete freedom to come and go as she pleases. If she chooses to stay in her room, it's because she feels better that way." "She's not choosing, Christina. I know my mother. Something is wrong." Christina crossed her arms, and for the first time since he had arrived, her voice lost its sweetness. "What are you implying exactly?" "I'm saying I need to understand what's changed. Why is the house different? Why are the old photographs gone? Why is my mother isolated?" "I changed a few things because this house needed an update. We can't live in the past forever, Richard. And as for your mother, she's going through a difficult time, but she is being cared for. If you don't trust me, maybe you should spend more time here." The words were spoken with venom disguised as reason. Christina knew exactly how to poke at Richard's guilt, how to make him feel that he was responsible for everything. And in a way he was. After all, it was he who had been absent, who had chosen work as a refuge after the tragedy, who had allowed Christina to take absolute control of the mansion. But now, looking at his wife, he noticed something he had previously ignored. She didn't love this house. She tolerated it. And more than that, she wanted to erase it. Erase the history, the memories, everything that harked back to the past. And in the midst of this erasure, his mother was being silenced. "I will spend more time here, Christina. I'm going to take care of my mother personally." Christina smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Excellent. I'm sure that will do us all good." She turned and went down the stairs, leaving Richard alone in the hallway. He stood there for a few minutes, trying to process everything. Then he decided he needed to talk to Mrs. Davis. He went down to the kitchen and found her preparing dinner, her movements mechanical, her face closed. "Mrs. Davis, I need you to be honest with me. What is happening to my mother?" The housekeeper stopped what she was doing and looked around as if afraid of being overheard. "Mr. Richard, I don't know if I should." "You can talk to me. You always could." Mrs. Davis took a deep breath, the words coming out in an urgent whisper. "Your mother is not well, sir, and it's not just fatigue. Since Mrs. Christina came to live here, things have changed. At first it was small changes. She would rearrange the furniture, change the curtains, say she was modernizing. Mrs. Beatrice tried to participate, to give her opinion, but she was always ignored. Then the photographs, the paintings, the old objects started to disappear. Your mother would get upset, but she wouldn't say anything. I think she didn't want to create conflict, didn't want you to feel caught in the middle of a war. And now? What's changed now? Now she barely leaves her room. Her meals are brought up to her. She no longer receives visits from her old friends. Mrs. Christina always has an excuse, says Mrs. Beatrice is unwell, that she doesn't want to see anyone. But I see it, Mr. Richard. I see the look in your mother's eyes. She's fading away. Richard felt anger rise in his chest. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Mrs. Davis looked down, ashamed. I tried, sir. I called you a few times, but Mrs. Christina always answered, said she would pass on the message. I wrote letters, but I never got a response. I think she intercepted them. And I was afraid. Mrs. Christina made it clear that if I caused trouble, I would be fired. And if I leave, who will look after Mrs. Beatrice? Richard placed a hand on the housekeeper's shoulder. You did what you could. But now I'm here, and I'm going to find out what's happening. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He lay next to Christina, listening to her calm, regular breathing, while his own mind churned with questions. When the clock struck 3 in the morning, he got up and walked through the dark corridors of the mansion. He went to the library, one of the few rooms that still maintained its original essence. There, among the mahogany shelves and old books, he allowed himself to remember. He remembered Marina. His Marina, with her sweet eyes and easy laugh. She wasn't rich, didn't come from a traditional family, but she had a huge heart. When he brought her to meet his mother, Richard feared that Mrs. Beatrice would reject her, would consider her unsuitable for the Anderson heir. But the opposite happened. Beatrice and Marina connected immediately. They would spend entire afternoons talking in the garden, cooking together, laughing at old stories. Marina had brought life to that house, and Beatrice finally had the daughter she had always wanted. And then came the tragedy. Marina got pregnant, but the pregnancy was complicated from the start. There were complications, bleeding, hospital stays. On the day of the delivery, everything fell apart. Marina and the baby were gone, leaving a void that no words could fill. Richard shut down. He threw himself into work, travelled, avoided the house, avoided his mother, avoided everything that could remind him of what he had lost. And Beatrice, who also loved Marina like a daughter, found herself alone with her grief. It was into this void that Christina appeared. They met at a business event in New York. She was a public relations executive for a large corporation, eloquent, sophisticated, full of plans and ambitions. Richard let himself get involved. It wasn't love, he knew that. It was convenience, a need not to be alone, a desire to forget. When he announced the wedding, Mrs. Beatrice said nothing. She just hugged him and whispered, "Be happy, my son." But he wasn't happy. And now, walking through that silent library, Richard realized that his mother hadn't been either. He pulled one of the old photo albums from the shelf. He opened it and saw images of Marina, of his mother, of himself, all smiling on days that seemed so distant. He turned the pages and found photos from his wedding to Marina, from the baby shower that never happened, from family parties when the house still breathed joy. And then he noticed something. There were no photos of Christina there, not a single one. It was as if she had been inserted into the family's history without leaving a trace. A sound pulled him from his thoughts. It was a creak coming from upstairs. Richard closed the album and went up the stairs slowly, trying not to make a noise. The sound was coming from the second-floor hallway, near Beatrice's room. He approached and saw a sliver of light under the door. Someone was inside. Richard drew closer and pressed his ear to the door. He heard muffled voices. One was Christina's, the other seemed to be his mother's, but it was weak, trembling. He tried to open the door, but it was locked. He knocked. "Christina! Mom!" The silence was instantaneous. Then Christina's voice answered, serene. "Richard, what are you doing awake?" "I heard a noise. Is everything okay in there?" "Yes, it is. Your mother had a nightmare. I came to calm her down." "Open the door." A pause. "She's sleeping now, Richard. It's better not to wake her. Christina, open this door." There was the sound of a key turning and the door opened. Christina stood there in her nightgown, her hair down, an expression of barely concealed annoyance. Behind her, Richard saw his mother lying in bed, her back to him, motionless. "See? She's fine. Now, let's go back to our room and let her rest." Richard entered the room and approached the bed. Beatrice seemed to be sleeping, but something was wrong. Her face was tense, her lips pressed together. He touched her hand, and she slowly opened her eyes. When she saw her son, a tear trickled from the corner of her eye. "Mom," she said nothing. She just squeezed his hand and closed her eyes again. Richard looked at Christina, who maintained her impassive expression. "Come on, Richard, let her sleep." He left the room, but something about that scene bothered him deeply, and as he returned to his own room, a certainty began to form in his mind. He had to find out what was really happening in that house, and he had to find out fast before it was too late. The first rays of the next morning's sun entered Richard's bedroom window, but he had been awake for hours. He hadn't been able to sleep a wink after the strange scene in the early morning. The image of his mother huddled in bed, that single tear rolling down, Christina's cold and calculated gaze. It all mixed in his mind, like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't yet assemble. He got up before Christina woke and went down to the kitchen. Mrs. Davis was already there, preparing coffee. Seeing him, she seemed relieved, as if his presence were a shield against something invisible but threatening. "Good morning, Mr. Richard. Did you sleep well?" "Not really, Mrs. Davis. I need you to tell me everything. From the beginning. When did things start to change?" The housekeeper glanced nervously at the door, making sure they were alone. Then, in a low voice, she began to speak. "It was gradual, you see. At first, after you and Mrs. Christina got married, she was even friendly. She would talk to Mrs. Beatrice, ask about the house's history, seemed interested. But then she started changing little things, a cushion here, a vase there. Mrs. Beatrice didn't mind much. She thought it was natural for a wife to want to put her stamp on the house. But then the changes got bigger. The furniture was replaced, the paintings removed, and whenever Mrs. Beatrice suggested something or disagreed, Mrs. Christina had a ready answer, always polite, always logical, but one that completely nullified your mother's opinion. Richard poured himself some coffee, the hot liquid going down his throat as he absorbed every word. "And my mother never complained to me. She didn't want to worry you, sir. After everything you went through with Mrs. Marina, she knew you were fragile. She wanted you to be happy. So she swallowed her sadness and pretended everything was fine." Richard felt guilt tighten in his chest like a vice. And her friends, Mrs. Eleanor, Mrs. Constance, that group that always came for afternoon tea. Mrs. Davis sighed. Mrs. Christina started cancelling the gatherings. She'd say Mrs. Beatrice wasn't feeling well, that she needed to rest. At first, the friends would call, send messages, but after so many refusals, they stopped, and Mrs. Beatrice became more and more isolated. She who had always been so sociable, so cheerful, it was as if her light was being extinguished day by day. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made Mrs. Davis fall silent immediately. Christina appeared at the kitchen door, impeccable even just after waking, wearing a white silk robe. "Good morning, you're up early." Her voice was sweet, but there was something in her eyes that didn't match the friendly tone. "I couldn't sleep," Richard replied, watching her closely. "I was thinking about my mother." "Understandable. You worry about her a lot. By the way, I was thinking of preparing a special lunch today. Maybe that will cheer Mrs. Beatrice up." Richard nodded, but kept his expression neutral. "Good idea. I'll go up and see how she is." Christina opened her mouth as if to protest, but held back. "Of course, I'll help Mrs. Davis here in the kitchen." Richard went up the stairs slowly, paying attention to every detail of the house that had previously gone unnoticed. The hallways seemed colder, emptier. He reached his mother's room and knocked softly. "Mum, can I come in?" This time the answer came more quickly. "Come in, son." He opened the door and found Beatrice sitting in the same armchair, but today the curtains were partially open, allowing light to enter. She seemed a little better, more present. "Good morning, Mom. How did you sleep?" Beatrice looked at him with those tired eyes that had seen so much. "Better knowing you're here. Sit with me, son." Richard pulled up a chair and sat beside her. For a few minutes, they sat in silence, just enjoying each other's company. Then, Beatrice began to speak, her voice weak but determined. "Richard, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise you'll listen to me until the end, without interrupting." He nodded, holding her hand. "I know you suffered a lot with the loss of Marina and the baby. I suffered too, son. Marina was like a daughter to me. When she was gone, I felt like I lost both of you. You pulled away, buried yourself in work, and I understood. Everyone deals with grief in their own way. But then you met Christina, and I thought maybe it was your chance to be happy again. I wanted so much for you to be happy." She paused, breathing with difficulty. Richard waited patiently. "At first I tried to like her. I tried to accept the changes she was making to the house. After all, she was your wife. She had the right to make the house her own. But then I realized it wasn't just about decoration. It was about erasure. Erasing Marina, erasing you as a child, erasing your father, erasing me. Every object that disappeared took a piece of our history with it. And when I tried to speak up, when I tried to be part of the decisions, I was ignored. Not rudely, no. Christina is too smart for that. She just made me feel that my opinions were old-fashioned, that I didn't understand the modern world, that it was better to leave it in her hands." "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" Beatrice smiled. "Sadly. Because you were happy, son, or at least you seemed to be, and I didn't want to be the meddling mother-in-law, the grumpy old woman who gets in the way of her son's marriage. So I kept quiet, withdrew, made myself invisible in my own home." Tears began to stream down Richard's face. "You could never be invisible to me, Mom. Never." "But I was, son. You traveled so much, worked so much. When you called, Christina always answered, always said everything was fine. And you believed it because it was easier to believe, because the truth hurts too. Much." Richard squeezed her hand. "That's going to change, I promise. I'll take care of you, I'll bring your friends back, I'll restore the house. I'll make everything go back to how it was." Beatrice shook her head. "It's not about making everything go back to how it was, Richard. The past is gone, Marina is gone. But it's about me having a voice again, being able to exist without fear, to start living again instead of just surviving." They talked for over an hour. Beatrice told him about the small daily humiliations, about how Christina controlled everything from the food that was served to who could or could not visit her. She told him how she felt like a prisoner in her own room, how she was afraid to go downstairs and find another part of her history erased. When Richard finally left the room, he was a changed man. The fog that had clouded his vision for the past few years had lifted. He saw everything clearly now, and he needed to act. He went down the stairs with firm steps and found Christina in the living room, flipping through a decoration magazine. "Christina, we need to talk. We need to—" "Seriously?" She looked up, one eyebrow arched. "Of course. What is it?" "I want things to change. My mother is not well, and a large part of that is my fault for being away so much. But it also has to do with how things are being run here." Christina's face hardened slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm going to spend more time at home. I'm going to reorganize my work schedule, and I want my mother to have her autonomy back. She will start receiving her friends again. She will start participating in the decisions of the house again." Christina put the magazine aside, her posture becoming more rigid. "Richard, your mother is fragile. She needs care, rest. It's not healthy to overload her with decisions and tiring visits. A doctor should be the one to decide what's healthy for her, not you. And by the way, I'm making an appointment for her today. Richard, you're overreacting. I'm taking very good care of your mother." "Are you?" He took a step forward. "Then explain to me why she's practically a recluse in her room, why her friends don't come here anymore, why all the objects that had meaning to her have disappeared." Christina stood up, her eyes shining with contained anger. "I modernized this house because it was falling apart, stuck in the past. I did what you didn't have the courage to do. And as for your mother's friends, they stopped coming because she herself didn't want to see them anymore. But of course now I'm the villain of the story." "I'm not saying you're a villain. I'm saying things are going to change. This is my mother's house, and she is going to feel at home here again." Christina gave a cold smile. "This is my house too, Richard. I'm your wife, or have you forgotten?" "I haven't forgotten, but that doesn't give you the right to erase my family's history." The silence that followed was heavy. Christina stared at him for long seconds, then picked up her purse. "I have to go out, I have appointments, we'll talk later when you're calmer." She left, slamming the door hard enough to make the pictures on the wall tremble. Richard stood there, his heart beating fast. He knew he had just crossed a line, that things between him and Christina would never be the same. But he also knew he had done the right thing. In the following days, Richard put his plan into action with the determination of someone who had finally seen the truth. He called Beatrice's old friends, explaining that she was better and would love to see them. On the other end of the line, Mrs. Eleanor, his mother's oldest friend, started to cry. "Richard, my dear boy, it's been so long. We tried several times, but we were always told that Beatrice couldn't receive visitors. We started to think she didn't want our company anymore." "No, Mrs. Eleanor, my mother has always wanted your company. There was a misunderstanding, but it's all resolved now. Can you come over on Friday afternoon?" The lady's voice was choked with emotion. "Yes, I will, dear, and I'll bring the others too. We've missed her so much." He scheduled an appointment with Dr. Franklin, a trusted family doctor who had known Beatrice for decades. He began to return some of the old objects that Christina had stored in the attic, discovering more and more hidden treasures. A great-grandfather's pocket watch, a collection of porcelain that had belonged to his grandmother, books with emotional dedications. The house began to breathe again, as if waking from a deep sleep. Beatrice, little by little, began to leave her room. First just to the hallway, walking slowly, leaning on the furniture. Then to the living room, where she sat on the sofa that had belonged to her own mother, and stayed there for hours, just feeling the presence of familiar objects. Then, on a sunny afternoon, she went down to the garden. Richard watched her from the window, seeing her touch the roses that grew wild, caress the leaves of the century-old trees, breathe in the fragrant air. It was like watching a withered plant receive water after a long, cruel drought. She was still fragile, her legs trembling, her body thin, but there was life in her eyes again. That sparkle he remembered from his childhood was returning, still shy, but present. One morning, Beatrice woke up early and surprised Mrs. Davis in the kitchen. "Mrs. Davis, my dear, today I'm going to make the cornbread cake, the one Richard always loved." The housekeeper almost dropped the cup she was holding. "Mrs. Beatrice, are you sure? It's been so long. I'm sure I need to get back to doing the things I love, and it's been far too long since I've cooked in this house." The two spent the morning in the kitchen, and the smell of the baking cake spread through the mansion like a warm hug. Richard came downstairs, drawn by the aroma, and found his mother with her hands covered in flour, smiling in a way he hadn't seen in years. That smell. "It's your favorite cake, son. I thought it was time to bring back some traditions." He hugged her, feeling for the first time in a long time that maybe things could really get better. Christina, on the other hand, grew increasingly distant and hostile. She spent long periods away from home, saying she had work meetings, urgent projects, unavoidable commitments. When she was home, she maintained an icy cordiality, speaking only when necessary, her lips always pressed into a thin line. Her meals were taken in her room or out of the house. She avoided the spaces where Richard and Beatrice were, as if their mere presence deeply bothered her. One night, when Richard was in the library organizing old papers, Mrs. Davis knocked on the door with a worried expression. "Mr. Richard, I need to show you something. It's important." She led him to a small room at the back of the house, an old sewing room that no one had used for years. The door creaked open, revealing a dusty and forgotten space. There, piled up without any care or organization, were dozens of photographs with broken glass, paintings with scratched frames, personal items thrown away like worthless trash. "I found all this hidden here when I was cleaning," Mrs. Davis explained, her voice trembling. "Mrs. Christina didn't throw it away, but she hid it, as if she wanted it. Out of sight, but couldn't completely get rid of it. There are things here that belong to your grandfather, to your father, memories of a lifetime." Richard knelt in the middle of that sea of discarded memories. He picked up a framed photo. It was from his wedding day with Marina, both of them smiling radiantly, she in a simple but beautiful dress, he in a navy blue suit, Beatrice beside them with tears of joy streaming down her face. The photo was crumpled in one corner, as if someone had tried to destroy it but gave up at the last moment. His heart squeezed so tightly he had to sit on the floor. How can someone do this to another person's memories? Mrs. Davis knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Some people don't understand that to build something new, you don't have to destroy what came before. Mrs. Christina, she wanted this house to be hers alone, her way. She wanted to erase everything that wasn't how she imagined it. Richard ran his fingers over the photo, wiping away the dust that covered it. We're going to take all of this back to its original places. Every photo, every object, we're going to give this house its soul back. They spent the entire night restoring the mansion. Mrs. Davis carefully cleaned each object, while Richard put them back in the places he remembered from his childhood. The great-grandfather's wall clock returned to the dining room. The grandmother's porcelain returned to the china cabinet. The family portraits were hung again in the second-floor hallway. Every photo from the wedding with Marina was given a special place. Richard wasn't trying to live in the past, but to honor the memory, acknowledging that those people and those moments were part of who he was. When the sun rose, casting golden rays through the mansion's windows, the house seemed to have gone back in time. Not completely, as that would be impossible, but enough for the essence of the Anderson family, with all its history, its joys, and its sorrows, to be present again. The house was telling stories once more. Beatrice came down for breakfast and stopped in the middle of the hall, looking around with eyes full of tears that flowed freely down her wrinkled face. "My God, son, you brought everything back. You brought our history back." Richard hugged her tightly, feeling her fragile body against his. "I did, Mom, and this is just the beginning. On Friday, your friends are coming for tea, and next week, we're going to the doctor for a full checkup." Beatrice held her son's face in her hands, looking deep into his eyes. "Thank you, my son. Thank you for seeing me again, for making me exist again." But as mother and son embraced in the hall, illuminated by the morning light, neither of them noticed Christina at the top of the stairs, partially hidden behind a marble column, watching the scene with an expression that mixed deep anger, growing frustration, and something more dangerous and dark. Her fingers dug into the palms of her hands with such force that they left marks. She had lost the control she had worked so hard to gain, every calculated move over 3 years now undone in a matter of days. And people like Christina, accustomed to manipulating and controlling, do not accept losing without a fight. They do not simply give up and move on. If she couldn't have control, no one would. And it was in that moment, seeing mother and son united again, that something dark and definitive formed in her mind. On Friday, as promised, Beatrice's friends arrived for tea. Mrs. Eleanor was the first, bringing an orange cake that was her specialty. Mrs. Constance came right after, with a bouquet of flowers from her garden. Mrs. Marion, the youngest of the group, brought a box of Belgian chocolates. They all hugged and cried when they saw Beatrice, commenting on how she was thinner, but her eyes were more alive. "Beatrice, dear, we missed you so much," Mrs. Eleanor said, holding her friend's hands. "I missed you too. More than you can imagine." They settled in the living room where Mrs. Davis had set a beautiful table with the family's antique porcelain. Tea was served in delicate cups, and for the first time in years, the house was filled with feminine laughter, old stories being retold, and true friendship being celebrated. Richard watched from a distance, his heart warmed, but he also noticed how Christina moved through the hallways like a shadow, always with a closed expression, never joining the group, refusing the ladies' polite invitations to join the conversation. That night, after the friends had left and Beatrice had gone up to her room, exhausted but happy, Richard sought out Christina. She was in the office working on her computer. "Christina, we need to talk about us." She didn't look up from the screen. "What is there to talk about?" "Everything. Our marriage is falling apart, you know that." Christina finally looked at him, her eyes as cold as ice. "It's falling apart because you chose your mother over me. It's not about choosing between you. It's about doing what's right. My mother was being silenced, erased. I couldn't ignore it anymore. And what about me?" She stood up, her voice rising. "I'm the one who took care of this house, who organized everything, who tried to bring order to this place stuck in time. Don't I count?" "You count, Christina, but not in the way you think. You can't erase a family's history to build your own version of what a home should be." Christina gave a bitter laugh. "Funny, You never complained before. In fact, you were barely here to notice anything, always traveling, always at work, always absent. And now you come to judge me?" Richard felt the blow because it was true. He had been absent, had taken refuge in work, had allowed all of this to happen. But that didn't justify what Christina had done. "You're right. I was absent, and that was a mistake I'm trying to correct. But what you did to my mother, to this house, cannot be justified by my absence." The silence between them was dense, heavy with years of unspoken words, accumulated resentments of a marriage that perhaps should never have happened. "I think we need to seriously think about our future," Richard finally said. Christina looked at him for a long time, then nodded. "Maybe we, too? Maybe this marriage was a mistake from the beginning." She left the office, leaving Richard alone with his thoughts. He knew a divorce was inevitable, but he also knew that with Christina, nothing would be simple. She wouldn't accept losing without trying to regain control in some way. The following days were as tense as a rope about to snap. Christina and Richard barely spoke, communicating only through short, necessary sentences laden with poorly disguised hostility. She spent more and more time away from home, leaving early and returning late at night, always with vague excuses about professional commitments and unavoidable meetings. She would lock herself in the guest room she now occupied, and Richard could hear her nervous pacing on the wooden floor during sleepless nights. The marriage was clearly over. It was obvious to anyone who entered that house and felt the tension in the air, but neither of them had the courage or energy to take the final definitive step. It was as if they were both waiting for the other to give in first, for someone to have the courage to utter the final words that would officially seal the end. Beatrice, on the other hand, was flourishing like a rose finally receiving sun after months in the shade. With her friends returning regularly for afternoon teas, filling the house with laughter and lively conversation, with Richard present and attentive to every detail of her well-being, with the house regaining its identity and history through restored objects and re-hung photographs, she seemed to grow younger day by day. The wrinkles around her eyes seemed less deep, her posture gradually straightened. The sparkle returned to her gaze. It was like watching a person rise from the ashes. The doctor who examined her in a routine checkup, Dr. Franklin, who had known her for over 20 years, was genuinely impressed with the transformation he witnessed. "Mrs. Beatrice, you are doing much better than I expected when I received your request for an appointment. Your tests are all within the normal range. Excellent blood pressure, controlled glucose, a strong heartbeat. You just need to gain a little weight, rebuild your muscle mass, and continue with your daily walks in the garden." She smiled broadly, a smile that lit up her entire face, holding Richard's hand with strength and affection. "I feel alive again, Dr. Franklin. After so long, so of just existing, I'm finally living again. It's incredible, almost miraculous how the right company, true love, and a welcoming home make a profound difference in a person's health. The body responds when the soul is well." On a rainy Tuesday, with the sky grey and heavy over Stonebridge, Richard was in his office organizing documents when he received a call from an unknown number. "Mr. Anderson, my name is Edward Taylor. I'm calling on behalf of your wife, Christina Anderson. She has hired me to represent her in the divorce proceedings." Richard sighed deeply, closing his eyes. It was expected, it was inevitable, but it still hurt to acknowledge the official end of something in which he had invested hope, however small. "I understand. I will hire my own lawyer, and we will be in touch shortly." "There's one more thing, Mr. Anderson," the lawyer continued in a professional but slightly unsettling tone. "My client is requesting a considerable division of marital assets, including a substantial percentage of the family mansion." "What?" Anger began to bubble up inside Richard. "The mansion has been in my family for generations. It's a family inheritance, not a marital asset." "But your wife lived there for 3 years as the lady of the house, contributing to its maintenance and administration. She believes she is entitled to fair compensation for her services." Richard felt rage rise like lava. "Tell your client that my lawyers will be in touch, and also tell her she has picked the wrong fight." He slammed the phone down, the receiver almost slipping from his trembling hands. So Christina wanted to take part of the mansion. After everything she had done, the suffering she had caused, she still had the audacity to want to tear away a piece of his family's heritage. He needed to talk to Mrs. Davis. He went down to the garden and found her watering the flowers, her movements methodical and calming. "Mrs. Davis, I need to ask you something important. Did you keep any records of what happened here over the last few years? Any concrete proof of how my mother was treated?" The housekeeper stopped what she was doing, looked around to make sure they were alone, and then nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. I did. I didn't know if it would ever be useful, but my gut told me to document things, to have proof if it was ever needed." She led him to her small room at the back of the house, a simple but organized space. From under her bed, she pulled out an old, worn-out shoebox. Inside were school notebooks filled with handwritten notes, discreetly taken photos, and even some audio recordings on her old cell phone. "I started writing things down when I realized the situation was getting worse, that it wasn't just a matter of different personalities," Mrs. Davis explained in a low voice. "The dates Mrs. Beatrice went without eating properly because Mrs. Christina said she was on a diet, that she needed to lose weight. The times her friends called to visit and were turned away with excuses. The occasions I found Mrs. Beatrice crying alone in her room, completely disheartened. The changes in the house, the disappearance of objects. It's all here recorded." Richard flipped through the notebooks with trembling hands, his heart aching with every word. Mrs. Davis had recorded everything meticulously, with precise dates, times, and specific details. It was a detailed chronicle of the silent, systematic cruelty his mother had endured for years. Each page was a stab of guilt in his chest. "Mrs. Davis, this is extremely important. I'm going to need to show this to my lawyer. Are you willing to testify if necessary?" "Do what you need to do, sir. I just wanted to protect Mrs. Beatrice. She didn't deserve any of this." That night, after the rain had stopped and the stars began to appear shyly, Richard sought out his mother. She was on the back porch, wrapped in a wool shawl, watching the stars as she used to do when he was a child. "Mom, I need to talk to you about the divorce." Beatrice nodded, as if she already knew, as if she had been waiting for this conversation. "Christina wants part of the house, doesn't she?" Her voice was calm, resigned. "How did you know?" "Because that's what people like her do, son. They can't just leave and start over. They need to take something, tear something away, leave a permanent scar." Richard sat next to her in the wicker chair. "I won't let her. This house is yours, it's mine, it's our family's. She won't take anything from here, I'm sure of it." Beatrice took her son's hand with her thin, cold ones. "Just be careful, Richard. Christina is smart and vengeful. When people like that lose control, when they feel they are being defeated, they will do anything to cause as much damage as possible. It's no longer about winning, but about destroying." In the following days, the atmosphere in the mansion became even more heavy and suffocating. Christina knew that Richard had hired lawyers and that the legal battle was just beginning. She moved through the house like a hostile ghost, her eyes always cold as ice, her movements calculated and precise. She didn't scream, didn't make public scenes. It was worse than that. She simply existed there as a threatening presence, a storm about to break. One Saturday morning, Richard woke to a strange noise coming from downstairs. It was raised voices, echoing through the halls. He dressed quickly and ran down, his heart pounding. In the hall, he found Christina arguing with Mrs. Davis. The housekeeper was pale, clutching her apron with trembling hands. Beatrice was on the stairs, pale, watching the scene. "What's going on here?" Christina turned to him, her eyes shining with pure rage. "I'm firing this employee. She no longer works in this house. I want her out immediately." "You don't have the authority to do that," Richard replied firmly. "I don't? I'm as much the owner of this house as you are." "No. You are my wife, or rather my future ex-wife. Mrs. Davis has worked for my family for over 40 years. You are not firing her." Christina took a step forward, invading his personal space. "She gave you those notebooks, didn't she? Those fabricated notes created to harm me. They're not lies. They are documented facts that show exactly what you did." Christina's face contorted with rage. "You're going to regret this, all of you. You think you can just kick me out like this without consequences? No one is kicking you out, Christina. But this marriage is over. You need to accept that. She looked at him, at Mrs. Davis, at Beatrice. Then, with a sudden movement, she grabbed her purse and slammed the door as she left. Beatrice came down the stairs, trembling. She's losing control, son. This is dangerous. I'll make sure she doesn't do anything else. But even as he said it, Richard felt a growing unease. That afternoon, while organizing papers in his office, he found something disturbing. Documents he had never seen before. Powers of attorney, bank transfers, contracts, all signed by him, but he had no memory of them. He looked closer. The signatures were his, but slightly different. Then he realized they were forgeries. Christina had forged his signature on several documents over the years. He immediately called his lawyer. "Dr. Paul, I found something serious. Christina forged my signature on several documents." "This is very serious, Richard. Forgery is a crime. I'll need to see those documents today." When night fell, Mrs. Davis prepared dinner. Richard, Beatrice, and she sat at the table. But no, one had an appetite. "I wonder where she is," Beatrice asked worriedly. "I don't know, but tomorrow I'm going to the police." But that night, around 2 a.m, Richard was awakened by a strange smell. Smoke. He jumped out of bed. The hallway was filled with a grey haze. Fire. The house was on fire. "Mom! Mrs. Davis!" he yelled, running. He pounded on Beatrice's door. It was locked. He began to kick it desperately. "Mom! The house is on fire!" "Richard! The door is locked!" He kicked until the lock gave way. Beatrice was in bed, coughing. He scooped her up in his arms and ran out. He passed Mrs. Davis's room. "Mrs. Davis, get out! Fire!" The three of them ran down the stairs. The smoke was coming from the office. They reached the garden, coughing. Richard called the fire department. Then, looking at the house, he saw a figure on the other side of the garden. It was Christina, watching the mansion burn. "Did you do this?" he shouted, advancing toward her. Christina smiled coldly. "If I can't have it, no one can. You think you can throw me out without consequences? You're insane. There were people inside." "But everyone got out. How lucky!" Richard grabbed his phone and started recording. "You just confessed to arson. That's attempted murder." Christina's smile faltered. She realized her mistake. She took a few steps back and started running, disappearing into the darkness. The firefighters arrived and controlled the fire. The office was destroyed, part of the library damaged, but they saved the mansion. Richard showed the recording to the police. A warrant was issued. Christina was found 2 hours later trying to catch a bus. She was arrested and taken to the police station. In the following days, the full truth came to light. The forgeries, Beatrice's isolation, the arson. Christina was indicted on multiple charges. She lost everything. Richard and Beatrice began to repair the damage. It was symbolic. They were rebuilding not just the house, but their own lives. One afternoon, supervising the construction, Richard saw his mother in the garden talking with her friends. She was smiling. In that moment, he knew they had won. Not against Christina, but against the silence, against the forgetting. Beatrice noticed her son watching and waved. He waved back, feeling that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The first light of morning entered the window of the room where Michael had spent another sleepless night. This time, however, it wasn't restlessness that kept him awake, but planning. There was much to be done, and every decision needed to be made carefully. Amelia's recording was powerful, but as Vivian had mentioned, recordings without consent had legal limitations. He needed more. He needed concrete evidence, documents, testimonies that could not only expose Vivian, but also lead to an investigation of Dr. Fletcher. Early in the morning, while Helen was still in the restorative sleep of someone who finally felt safe in her own home, Michael went down to the office and began to organize everything he had found. The forged will, the questionable power of attorney, the vials of medication with excessive dosages, Marina's diary with her last worried notes about the birth. He photographed everything, made copies, organized them into folders. He was building a case. Amelia appeared with fresh coffee and warm bread. She seemed different, too. A weight had been lifted from her shoulders, a lightness in her movements. For the first time in months, she wasn't walking on tiptoes, afraid of being heard or reprimanded. "Mr. Michael, Mrs. Helen is waking up. She's asking for you." He went up the stairs quickly and found his mother sitting up in bed, the pillows arranged behind her, an expression on her face he hadn't seen in years. It wasn't just relief, it was determination. "Good morning, Mom. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in a very long time," she replied, and her voice was firmer, more present. "Michael, we need to talk about what we're going to do now." He sat beside her on the bed. "I've already started organizing everything. I'm going to find a lawyer today. Someone who specializes in family law and criminal cases too. We need to challenge that power of attorney, that will. And we need to open an investigation into what happened to Marina." Helen held her son's hand, her eyes tearful but firm. "I should have fought harder. When Vivian started isolating me, medicating me, I should have resisted more strongly. But I was so tired, Michael. So tired of the pain, the loneliness. After we lost Marina and the baby, something in me died too. And when you pulled away, when you buried yourself in work and left me here alone, I just gave up. Mom, none of this is your fault. I'm the one who should have been here. I should have seen what was happening. We both failed each other, but now we have a chance to fix it. And I want to do more than just recover, Michael. I want justice. For Marina, for that innocent baby, for us." In that moment, Michael saw the strong woman his mother had always been. The matriarch who commanded that house with love and firmness, who had raised a son alone after being widowed, who had built bridges between generations. She was coming back, and this time he wouldn't leave her alone. The days that followed were intense. Michael hired Anne-Marie Evans, a respected lawyer in Chicago, known for her work in complex family cases and for not being afraid to face powerful adversaries. When she heard the whole story, saw the collected evidence and listened to the recording, her eyes shone with the determination of someone who knew they were dealing with a case that could change lives. "This is serious," she said, sitting in the mansion's living room, her documents spread across the table. "Very serious. The document forgery, the improper medication, all of that would be enough for civil and possibly criminal proceedings. But if we can prove there was intentional medical negligence in your first wife's case, we're talking about homicide. Dr. Fletcher could lose his medical license. He could be imprisoned." "And Vivian?" Michael asked. "If we prove she was aware and actively participated in the planning, she could also be indicted as an accomplice. But we need to be careful. People like that usually have equally skilled lawyers, and they will fight with everything they have." "I don't care how long it takes or how much it costs. I want justice." Anne-Marie nodded. "Then let's begin. First, we'll petition to invalidate the power of attorney and the will. I'll need Mrs. Helen to undergo a complete medical examination with doctors I trust to document her condition after the excessive medication. We'll also need to exhume the records from Marina's delivery, request the complete medical files, and hire experts to analyze whether there was medical malpractice." Helen, who was sitting in her favorite armchair, one that Vivian had tried to remove but Amelia had hidden in the attic and was now back in the living room, spoke with a firm voice. "Do whatever is necessary. I'm not afraid to face this. For Marina, for my grandson, I will do anything." While the legal process began to unfold, something else was happening inside the mansion. It was as if the house were being slowly restored, not just physically but spiritually. Michael and Amelia worked together to bring back the objects that had been removed. The piano returned to the music room. The old paintings were re-hung on the walls. The photographs returned to their places. Each piece that came back was like breathing new life into those rooms. Helen, for her part, was recovering surprisingly well. Without the excessive medication, her mind was becoming clearer. She began to leave her room, to walk in the garden, to resume small activities she loved. She started painting again, something she hadn't done in years. Her watercolors began to appear around the house, soft landscapes in pastel tones, different from the somber works she had created in the months under Vivian's control. One afternoon, 3 weeks after Vivian's expulsion, Eunice, Helen's longtime friend, appeared at the door. Amelia had contacted her discreetly, explaining that it was now safe to visit, that things had changed. When Eunice saw Helen in the garden, painting under the shade of an old apple tree. Tears ran down her face. "Helen, my friend, I thought I had lost you." The two women embraced for a long time, and it was as if years of forced loneliness dissolved in that moment. Soon other old friends began to return. The house once again received visitors, had voices, laughter, life. Afternoon teas were resumed, the once neglected garden was revitalized, and Helen returned to personally caring for her favorite flowers. Michael, watching all this, felt a mixture of joy and regret. Joy at seeing his mother reborn, but regret for all the lost time, for all the signs he had ignored. One evening, sitting with her on the porch under the starry sky of Lake Forest, he finally expressed what he felt. "Mom, I'm so sorry. For everything. For not seeing what was happening. For pulling away. For bringing Vivian into our lives." Helen held his hand, her touch now firmer, more alive. "Michael, you were grieving. I understand that now more than ever. When we lose someone we love, especially so traumatically, we lose ourselves too. You got lost in the pain and I got lost in my own sadness. Vivian saw that and took advantage, but it's not your fault, son. It's hers. Even so, I should have been stronger. Marina would have been stronger." "Marina was special," Helen said, her voice soft but full of emotion. "She lit up this house. And yes, she would have seen through Vivian immediately. But Marina isn't here anymore, Michael. And as painful as it is, we have to accept that and move on. Not out of obligation, but because it's what she would have wanted. Sometimes I wonder if I'll have the strength to love again. For real, after Marina, after Vivian, after everything. You will, when the time is right, when you find someone who truly deserves your heart. But don't rush. Heal yourself first. Learn to live again. And when love comes, you'll know." That conversation marked a turning point for Michael. He realized he was trapped not only in the past, but also in fear. Fear of feeling, fear of connecting, fear of being vulnerable again. But watching his mother, who had been through so much and was still finding the strength to live fully, he began to understand that true courage wasn't in avoiding pain, but in choosing to live despite it. Meanwhile, the investigation progressed. Anne-Marie had obtained the medical records from Marina's delivery, and experts were analyzing every detail. The findings were disturbing. There were inconsistencies in the procedures followed, questionable medical decisions, an inexplicable rush to perform the C-section when there was no clear indication for it. The expert report concluded that there was strong evidence of medical negligence and possibly something more sinister. The State Medical Board opened an investigation against Dr. Fletcher. Former patients began to come forward, reporting strange situations, inappropriate medications, dubious procedures. A pattern began to emerge, the pattern of a doctor who put personal interests above the well-being of his patients. Vivian, upon learning of the investigation, tried one last move. She showed up at the mansion unannounced, demanding to be let in, saying she still had rights as Michael's wife. But she found the doors locked and Michael on the other side, firm in his decision. "You have no more power here, Vivian. I've already filed for divorce. I've already challenged all the documents you forged, and the investigation into Marina is underway. If you're smart, you'll cooperate with the authorities. It's the only chance you have for any leniency." "I did nothing wrong," she shouted, but there was desperation in her voice now, no longer the calculated coldness of before. "You're destroying my life because of assumptions, of conspiracy theories from a confused old woman and a man who can't get over the past. My mother is not confused. She's more lucid than she's been in months, precisely because she's no longer under your influence and your drugs. And I'm not stuck in the past, I'm finally facing it. Something I should have done a long time ago." Vivian tried one more time. "Michael, please, we can sort this out between us. No need for lawyers, for police. I'll leave. You can have everything, just don't destroy me." But Michael had learned. He had learned that some people don't deserve second chances, that compassion cannot be mistaken for weakness, that justice sometimes requires firmness. If you really did nothing wrong, as you say, then you have nothing to worry about. The investigation will clear everything up, but if you did, and we know you did, then you will pay for what you caused. Now get off my property." She left, and that was the last time Michael saw her in person. The divorce proceedings continued, with Vivian contesting everything, trying to buy time, but eventually accepting a settlement that gave her very little of what she had originally planned. The power of attorney was invalidated, the forged will was nullified, and the criminal investigation against her and Dr. Fletcher continued, slow but inexorable. Months passed. Autumn arrived, bringing with it a change in the garden's colors, golden and orange leaves covering the stone paths. The mansion, now free from the heavy atmosphere that had dominated it, breathed with new life. Helen was fully recovered, once again the vibrant woman she had always been. She had even started giving painting classes to children from the community, bringing a young and joyful energy into the house. Michael had reorganized his professional life. He didn't quit his job, but he established healthier boundaries. He began working a few days a week in Chicago and others in Lake Forest, staying present in his mother's life. He also started therapy, something he had resisted for years but now recognized as essential to process everything he had been through. It was during one of these therapy sessions that he finally truly cried for Marina. Not the controlled tears he had shed before, but a deep, liberating cry of someone who was finally allowing himself to feel the full extent of his loss. And along with the pain came acceptance. Marina was gone, but the love they shared, the time they had together, the memories, all of that remained. Not as a chain that held him down, but as a gift that had shaped who he was. One Saturday afternoon, 6 months after Vivian's departure, the mansion hosted a celebration. Anne-Marie had called with good news. The state medical board had revoked Dr. Fletcher's license after proving multiple irregularities. He was being criminally prosecuted for medical negligence in Marina's case and others, and Vivian, after months of trying to escape, had been indicted as an accomplice in the crimes of document forgery and elder abuse. Justice, so slow and imperfect, was finally being served. To celebrate, Helen organized a dinner at the mansion, inviting old friends Amelia and her family, Anne-Marie, and a few others who had been important during that difficult period. The house was full of light, music, laughter. The bountiful table, prepared with love, brought together people who truly mattered. During dinner, Helen stood up to make a toast. Her voice, once weak and hesitant, now echoed strongly through the dining room. "I want to thank all of you for being here today. The last few months have been the most difficult of my life, but they have also been transformative. I learned that we are never too old to fight, never too weak to start over. I learned that true strength lies in asking for help, in accepting love, in not giving up. For even when all seems lost," she looked at Michael, her eyes shining with tears of gratitude. "My son came back to me, and I came back to myself, and together we managed to turn what could have been a tragic ending into a new beginning." Then she looked at Amelia. "And you, my dear friend, who never abandoned me even when it would have been easier to do so. You risked your job, your safety, to protect me. I will never forget that." Amelia, with tears streaming down her face, stood up and hugged Helen, and in that moment it was clear to everyone in the room that they were not employer and employee. They were soul sisters, united by an ordeal that could have destroyed them, but instead made them stronger. The dinner continued late into the night with deep conversations and light-hearted moments. Stories of the past were shared, but without sadness, only with the sweet melancholy of those who honor the departed. And for the first time in years, Marina's name was spoken aloud in that house, not with paralyzing pain, but with love and gratitude. In the weeks that followed, Michael did something he had been putting off. He went to the cemetery where Marina was buried, next to the small grave of their son who never received a name, but now had a simple headstone with the words, "Our angel, who barely touched the earth, but will forever inhabit our hearts." Michael sat on the grass, his back against a nearby tree, and talked. He talked to Marina about everything that had happened, about Vivian, about the justice being served, about how he had failed to see her one last time when she was alive, about how he had lost himself after she was gone. "I don't know if you can hear me," he said, his voice choked, "but I need you to know that I've never forgotten you. Not you, not our son. You are here." He touched his chest over his heart. "You always will be. And I promise to honor your memory by living the way you would have wanted me to live, with courage, with love, with true presence. The wind blew gently, rustling the leaves of the tree above him, and for a moment, Michael felt a peace he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the end of the pain. That would never completely go away. But it was acceptance, self-forgiveness, permission to move forward without guilt. Back at the mansion, he found his mother in the garden, watering the flowers that Marina had planted years ago. Those flowers that, against all odds, continued to bloom every spring. She loved these roses, Helen said, stroking one of the pink petals. She said they were resilient, that they survived even when neglected. I think she was right. Michael joined her in tending the garden. He said nothing, just worked beside his mother, his hands in the earth, connecting with something larger than themselves. And in that shared silence, full of understanding and love, they found healing. The months turned into a year. The criminal investigation continued its course, but Michael learned not to let it consume his life. He had done his part, had sought justice, and now he trusted that the system would do what was right. His focus was on living, on rebuilding, on being present. Helen blossomed impressively. Not only did she regain her physical and mental health, but she seemed more radiant than she had been even before all the trauma. There was a wisdom in her eyes now, a deep understanding that life, however difficult, is always worth living to the fullest. She began to write a book, memoirs of her life, of the family, of the lessons learned. It wasn't for publication, she said, but for future generations. So that her grandchildren, if they ever came to exist, would know where they came from, would know the stories that formed that family. Michael, for his part, slowly began to open up to the possibility of new relationships. He wasn't actively looking, but he wasn't closing himself off anymore either. He allowed himself to meet people, make friends, let things flow naturally. It was at an art exhibition in Chicago that he met Beatrice. She was a curator at a small museum, passionate about contemporary American art, with a contagious laugh and an uncomplicated way of looking at life. There was no love at first sight, no drama, just a quiet connection, a conversation that flowed naturally, a genuine mutual interest. They started seeing each other occasionally, without pressure, without expectations. Michael told her about Marina, about everything that had happened, and Beatrice listened without judgment, with genuine empathy. She didn't try to compete with a memory, didn't try to erase the past. She just accepted that it was part of who Michael was, and slowly, very slowly, Michael felt something he thought he would never feel again. Hope for a future that included love, companionship, maybe even a family. It wasn't the same as what he had with Marina. It was different, more mature, more conscious, but it was real, and it was good. When he finally took Beatrice to meet Helen, months after they started seeing each other, he was nervous, not because he feared his mother's judgment, but because it represented something significant. It was admitting that he was moving on, that he was allowing someone new into his heart and his family's life. Helen received Beatrice with genuine warmth. The two talked about art, about life, about small things and big questions. And when Beatrice left, Helen held her son's hands and said, "She's special, Michael, in a different way from Marina, but special all the same. And most importantly, she's real. There are no masks, no games, just a good person who clearly cares about you." "I know, Mom, and that scares me a little." "It's natural to be scared, after everything you've been through, but don't let fear steal the possibility of happiness. Marina wouldn't have wanted that for you. I don't want that for you. You deserve love, son. You deserve to be happy." Those words were liberating. Michael realized he had been, in a way, asking for permission to move on. Permission from his mother, permission from Marina's memory, permission from himself. And now, finally, he felt he had that permission. 2 years after that fateful day, he returned to the mansion and discovered the truth about Vivian. Michael stood in the garden, watching his mother teach a painting class to a group of children from the community. Their laughter filled the air, and Helen looked younger than her 74 years. Amelia was in the kitchen, preparing cookies for the children, humming an old tune. The mansion was alive again, not as it was before because it was impossible to go back in time, but alive in a new way, more conscious, more intentional. Every room had regained its soul. Every wall told stories. Every photograph honored a memory. Beatrice was by Michael's side, her hand intertwined with his. They had recently gotten engaged, a decision made, without haste, but with certainty. The wedding would be simple, at the mansion itself, with only close friends and family. And this time, Michael knew exactly what he was doing, knew who was by his side. "It's beautiful to see your mother like this," Beatrice said, squeezing his hand, "so full of life." "It's a miracle," Michael replied. "It could have ended so differently. If I hadn't come back when I did, if Amelia hadn't had the courage to record that conversation, if my mother hadn't found the strength to fight. But you did come back. Amelia was brave. Your mother fought. And now you're here, alive together. That's what matters." Michael pulled her into a hug, feeling gratitude for everything he had been through, however painful it had been. Because that pain had taught essential lessons. It had taught him about presence, about not taking the people we love for granted. It had taught him about courage, about the importance of facing difficult truths. It had taught him about forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness. And it had taught him that life, even after the greatest tragedies, goes on, and that we have a choice in how we live it. We can lock ourselves in emotional wardrobes, isolate ourselves in our pain, allow others to control our narrative. Or we can fight, we can seek help, we can choose to live fully, honoring those we've lost by living the best way we can. On that golden afternoon, with the sun beginning to set over the gardens of Lake Forest, Michael looked around and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Contentment. Not the superficial happiness of someone who ignores problems, but the deep contentment of someone who has faced their demons, sought justice, cared for their loved ones, and could now finally rest knowing they had done what was right. The mansion, which had almost become a tomb for his mother, was now a home again, a home full of light, love, honored memories, and promising futures. The doors were open, the curtains drawn back, the flowers blooming. And somewhere Michael liked to think Marina was smiling to see that the house she had loved so much was alive again, smiling to see Helen strong and radiant, smiling to see Michael finally at peace, finally able to love again, finally living instead of just existing. Justice had been served. Vivian was serving time for her crimes. Dr. Fletcher would never practice medicine again. The forged documents were nullified. The truth had won. But more important than legal justice was the emotional justice that had been achieved, the forgiveness, the healing, the reconnection, the restoration not just of a house but of a family, of lives, of purposes. As the sun set completely and the first stars began to appear in the Lake Forest sky, Michael made one last silent promise, a promise to never be absent again, to never take for granted the blessings he had, to live each day with intention and presence. Life had given him a second chance, and this time he wouldn't waste it. The mansion, with all its stories, all its pains and joys, would continue to stand. Future generations would walk its halls, plant flowers in its gardens, love in its rooms, live their own stories. And maybe, just maybe, when those future generations asked about the past, someone would tell the story of Helen, the story of a woman who was silenced, isolated, almost destroyed, but who found the strength to fight. The story of a son who was absent but returned, in time. The story of a loyal employee who became a hero. The story of justice, of truth, of love that triumphs over even the darkest manipulations. And that story would be a reminder that it's never too late to fight, never too late to seek the truth, never too late to choose life over resignation. Because in the end, what defines us are not the tragedies we face, but how we choose to respond to them. And Michael, Helen, and all those who loved them had chosen to respond with courage, with love, with an unshakable determination. That light would always conquer darkness. And so, as night covered the Lake Forest mansion with its mantle of stars, within those old walls there was only peace. The peace of one who has fought the good fight, who has sought and found justice, who has learned that a true home is not just a place, but the people who inhabit it and the love that fills it. The story of Michael and Helen which began with pain and nearly ended in tragedy, had found its true ending. Not a fairy tale ending where everything is perfect, but a real ending, where the wounds still exist but are healing, where painful memories coexist with new joys, where life continues in all its complexity and beauty. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Michael, Helen, and the fight against Vivian's manipulation has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by Helen's strength, by Amelia's courage, by Michael's journey of healing, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. This story reminds us of something essential. It's never too late to fight for those we love, never too late to seek the truth, and we should never underestimate the power of true presence in the lives of those who matter. Every day, we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, which make us reflect on our own lives and choices. Stories that not only entertain, but also transform, teach, and remind us to be more attentive, more present, more courageous. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another narrative that will move and inspire. Until then, take care of those you love and never stop fighting for what is right.